Welcome back. Now, the South African Revenue Service has announced a positive preliminary revenue collection outcome for the 2024-25 fiscal year. This is an achievement taking place in a tough economic environment. By the end of March 2025, SARS had collected a record gross amount of 2.303 trillion rand, representing year-on-year growth of 6.9%. The organization also saw a notable shift in revenue streams influenced by a combination of market dynamics. SARS Commissioner Kieswetter joins us now for more insight. Thank you so much for your time, Edward. Talk to me about the level of revenue collection that you did see in this 2024-25 fiscal year, considering indeed the backdrop of a subdued economic growth.
Thank you. And let's start there with the subdued economic growth, because a year ago in February, when the minister set the estimate, we had certain assumptions about what would happen in the economy and what GDP would be. We know now, a year later, that GDP growth has been lower than what was previously thought. We know wages, instead of growing at 8.4%, actually grew only at 4.6%. We also know that instead of expanding at 6%, imports contracted by 1.6%, and that fuel consumption contracted by 10%, which in one hand is good news because of the lower reliance on fuel oil. But all of that then has an adverse effect on actual revenue collections. And that meant that in October, the minister revised that number down to 1.841 from 1.863. Then the second half of the year, a few things happened which were positive. Okay. Firstly, the two-pot is yielding more than what we thought. We initially thought it would yield 5.5 billion. It's now yielding over 11 billion. We also know that there has been an uptick in consumption because 47 billion has flown back into the economy through withdrawals, and that has a multiplier effect. And so all of that was not enough to compensate for the decline, but it did slow down and arrest some of this decline. But at the heart of the results which we announced today is a focused drive on compliance activity. That is work that goes out to collect debt that is already due to the state, to collect outstanding returns, to verify declarations against which there may be an impermissible refund. And collectively, this body of work has contributed over 300 billion rand. Hence, against the revised estimate that the minister gave on the 12th of March of 1846, we delivered today an outcome of 1855, or almost 9 billion more. A pleasing result, but the result of hard work in a very tough environment.
It's quite interesting to note these shifts in revenue streams, of course, because of the economic backdrop and some of the things that you highlight. I did have the CEO of one of the retirement fund administrators actually telling me that majority of the people that withdrew from the two-pot system in September have come back for a second round. And I'm wondering if you have seen continued momentum on that front, Edward?
Yes, so remember, the limit is 30,000 per tax year. Yes. The tax year ended in February. And so we saw a slowdown after people have exhausted their limit. And then on the 1st of March, we saw an uptick again because people are now having their second bite at the cherry. So to date, we have had 2.8 million requests for directives, and 2.5 of those directives have already been approved, and that relates to over just about 2.7 taxpayers. What we do see, because there was also a concern that poor people who draw from this would have to pay taxes. Well, I can tell you that about 25% of those who have applied for the directive did not pay tax because they are below the tax-paying threshold.
Okay.
The bulk of the withdrawal is actually in the so-called middle-class band of income, which you would expect that middle-class families generally have debt levels, they have other obligations of discretionary income, whether it's health or education. And so you would expect that that would be where it sits. So overall, we saw a decline towards the end of February, and then March, we saw an uptick, and we think this year that uptick will continue until individuals have maxed out the 30,000 limit.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about VAT. Edward, we did see a growth in that. You also talk about an increase in consumption, partly because of the two-pot withdrawals. In the budget proposal, there has been a proposal of an increase of 1% in VAT over 2 years. What level of growth do you then expect to see from that if it is indeed approved, considering also that as much as we are seeing an uptick in consumption, consumers are still under pressure?
Look, that consumers are under pressure is undeniable. We see that also it has become harder to collect debt from taxpayers who do not dispute the debt, they simply don't have the money to pay it. We have seen an increase in applications for debt deferment arrangements. We have seen an increase in applications for debt compromises. So we definitely, through our lens, can see the struggles of ordinary people in the street. The minister in the tax year that starts today, or the financial year that starts today, have penciled in about 14 billion from the additional 0.5%. And then the others comes from not, for example, adjusting for inflation on personal income taxes.
Yeah.
So what have we seen this year? This year we have seen an increase in gross VAT collections of 823.5 billion rand against last year's 790, or a growth of 4.2%. But we've also seen a growth in refunds that grew at a higher level. So refunds grew from 343 to 365 or 366 billion, or an increase of 6.6 billion, 6.6%.
Yeah.
So what we are always concerned about is when there is a tax increase, we also see that there is an attempt to have access to the refund system because people generally will try and minimize their tax.
Yeah.
And that is why we have cautioned by saying that notwithstanding the increases in the VAT rate, we have not seen an increase in the effective tax rate against VAT. And that's because we believe that whilst the base grows, we will find several compliance issues that creep in, and it just becomes harder to administer. And an area for huge investment in modernization is the complete modernization of our VAT administrative platform, which is part of our modernization going forward.
Yeah, well, and we're hoping that that investment that has been allocated to SARS in the budget will go a long way in bettering the tax administration system. Thank you so much for your time and for your insights there, Edward. That was Edward Kieswetter, Commissioner of the South African Revenue Service.